Yeah, I think the two main areas of interest for this is number one, the growth potential that Africa's industries have not really been built. But number two, those that are already in existence have quite a long way to go in terms of both achieving energy efficiency and then against energy efficiency, then they can already be able to decarbonize. And the challenge and why the two go hand in hand is that a lot of the emissions currently could just be from inefficiency. So you could actually be able to achieve significant drops in carbon emissions just by being more efficient. And unfortunately, the culture, the history of industries in Africa have been built on inefficiency. A lot of the industries are used industries that are relocated from India. If you're talking about Kenya, they're coming from India, from China, and they're highly, highly inefficient. So by making them fast, efficient, and then looking at how to integrate renewable energy, then that also makes sense because even the initial cost of transition becomes very expensive if you're doing it against inefficiencies. I like to say that energy efficiency comes before renewable energy. And considering the current population of Africa and more importantly, the growth rate, it's estimated that Africa's population will double in the next maybe 30 to 40 years, even with all the various interventions for family planning, even if you are to reduce the average to 2 children, say, or less for Kenya, we will still double our population with a growth rate of over 2.5% per year. So considering that Africa will produce 1 billion or more new people in the next 40 years, that's the equivalent of China or India, then the growth trajectory will have to be on a low carbon path. Otherwise, all targets will be completely off.
Generally, one may look at daily actions. We may look at our homes, our cities, and we see that industrial products such as fertilizers, cements, oil, iron, and steel have been embedded in our day-to-day activities. And these products cannot totally be eradicated or casted out, but we have to look at novel ways to produce these things in order to sustain our lives as modern people in modern society. And in relation to industry, basically, we see that 3 major industries are responsible for the largest emissions, and these are the cement, iron and steel, and chemicals productions. And this now relates with Notori because Notori falls under the chemical production industries. And in order for us to achieve the minimum of 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature, we must act now. Before 2025, we now see ourselves in the case of a now or never predicament. Specifically in Notori, since we fall under the chemicals productions, we see that we must key in to the decarbonization in the Nigerian scheme. Nigeria has cement production companies, Nigeria has energy generation companies, and also chemicals and iron and steel. And these account for 93% of our emissions in total. We are not saying industrialization is not good, but we have to find a way to merge industrialization and climate action in order to progress and see ourselves in a truly sustainable economy. I would have to also say this, in the phase of this fourth industrial revolution, we see that Africa is presented with an opportunity for us to, have a form of economic disruption where there are solutions for challenges in education, climate change, vulnerability, and poor service. Then this is an opportunity for us to key into it. There's an opportunity for us to key into this fourth industrial revolution. And in Africa, if our industries and our policies and everything is ready, especially private sector engagement. We could benefit enormously from this opportunity presented at us, especially with our being young population. So the main idea is for us not to replicate the past mistakes of the past industrial revolutions, but for us to key into it in this current developmental landscape. We need to drift away from the business as usual approach and deeply consider the business benefits beyond the financial perspectives. This is where we talk about the triple bottom line and where we consider people, profit, and planet. So for us to maximize this in Utori, that's the reason why we say we have to tackle climate crisis. We have to reach net zero by 2050, and it is crucial for us to address these emissions in our industrial operations. This is why decarbonization in industry must be a priority for us if we must achieve sustainable development.
Yeah, I think the main challenge for decarbonizing comes from the typical very high intense energy and carbon manufacturing sectors. And on top of that would be cement, steel, and in Kenya's case, tea. I did a study for the Kenya Association of Manufacturers a number of years ago to look at the energy intensity of different sectors, which included those three, plus plastics, and I think dairy sector. And the tea industry has the highest energy intensity per kilogram of tea produced. Now, why this is important is that Kenya is the second largest exporter of black tea in the world. And a lot of this is done using wood fuel. And the wood fuel is not sustainable. In actual fact, it's coming from the forests and the water towers. So that presents both an environmental challenge for Kenya. In fact, in terms of Kenya's carbon emissions, number one is transportation, and number two is unsustainable wood fuel, mostly domestic, but industry does have a good percentage of that, and the tea industry accounts for more than half of those emissions. So that's one area that would need intervention to decarbonize as much as it doesn't feature on the radar because there's a lot of debate and understanding about sustainable biomass. There isn't much that has been developed in terms of the key indicators and the indices that can be able to show sustainability. But that said, then that presents also an opportunity to transition to more sustainable sources of biomass. We did energy audit for the largest tea factories in Kenya 10 years ago. And the best practice recommendation was to have combined heat and power. So the options that we looked at was waste to energy. We looked at other sources of biomass, like from the sugar industry, but all the models showed that the quantity that the tea industry is consuming cannot be supplied by the surplus of bagasse from the sugar industry. And from that, we looked at a more scalable option where you're not competing with human food to produce energy. So we settled on drought-resistant grass grown in the semi-arid areas and irrigation, and specifically napier grass or elephant grass, which has a very high growth rate. Most people don't know it grows faster than bamboo in terms of dry matter. Bamboo is fast in terms of height, but the napier grass has got more dry matter per acre of yield. So, and that it uses little water, then means that you can be able to practice sustainable farming in semi-arid areas. So that can present a substitution option that can also be deployed very quickly because it only takes 6 months for the grass to grow. And as we are speaking, one of the career members, which for full disclosure is also a business that I'm involved in, has secured some funding to already start planting this grass. We are planting about 20 acres just in the outskirts of Nairobi. So by maybe end of this month, we will have included a borehole, and this will supply about 20 tons a day of material. Well, actually 15 tons a day, because the yields are a bit lower than sawdust. Sawdust can run at 20, but this will run at 15 tons a day. And already just on the same road where the plant is located, there's more than, I would say how much? I would say there's more than 50 to 100 tons per day of demand from edible oil companies in the area and the cement industry. So going to the cement industry in Kenya was initially using fuel oil, but they switched from fuel oil to coal. So with the coal, they're now having more emissions, probably higher pollution, despite having put in measures to make it as efficient as possible. But the opportunity is that it is possible to blend up to 20% of the feedstock with sustainable biomass without having any operational changes required for the furnace. So that presents a quick win. So long as the feedstock is available, then they can be able to absorb that and reduce their carbon emissions by 15% without having to make a capital investment. Now, those who have made a capital investment have changed their boilers so that they can be able to run on any kind of biomass.
In Africa, we are highly challenged with lack of existing structural framework and financial database to support our decarbonization drive. You can see that many African countries have come up with energy transition plans from time to time, but oftentimes these roadmaps do not specify the roles which public and private sectors have to play in achieving this goal. So our very first challenge would be in terms of structural framework and financial database in order for the essential parties to play a role in really getting this decarbonization. So in order for us to transit, we need answers. We need answers to questions like, okay, what then is our fate in decarbonizing? How well do our shareholders in industries, how well are they in line with the rationale of industrial decarbonization? How does this enhance our bottom line? How do stakeholders as well and financial institutions, how do they engage in our processes, in our value chain? How well do they understand our processes, basically? And how do we develop capacity in public and private sectors in order for us to have a smooth transition into a carbon neutral economy? So basically, what we need is, if we have practical and plausible solutions to these questions raised, we will see ourselves aligning our interests. Multiple players will align their interests towards achieving the net zero goal. So hard-to-abate sectors have major questions to ask the government, the regulators, the financial institutions that are involved in getting this achieved. And we really need to see ourselves focusing on two major things, especially in Africa, which is our economic development and climate action. It's understandable that African industries want to key into climate action, but we also need to seriously consider the economic effects or the economic repercussions of this for those of us especially that are highly dependent on fossil fuels as our source of feedstock in order to run our businesses.
Yeah, well, for one, we definitely will need to engage with governments at some point. We need African governments to start owning the industrialization process, to embrace the shift towards productive use of energy, particularly renewable energy. But because we have the principal agent dilemma, where the governments do not act in the best interest of the people, so the custodians of best practice falls on the professional bodies, the professional associations, and in partnership with the investors, in partnership with the development partners, with the national governments, and with the local governments. So already we have started a process of seeing how the National Renewable Energy Associations can collaborate together and develop an aggregated project along a very specific technology. The same approach can be used by sector. We can do it for the tea industry. We already have a partnership between Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, Malawi, and Zambia, which are the tea growing countries in Kenya. So we can coordinate along for the tea sector. We can develop common standards, we can develop solutions, we can aggregate them, and then we can be able to present them to the national governments, to the development partners, to local investors as a standardized opportunity.
Okay, as we have said earlier, decarbonization offers far-reaching opportunities for all stakeholders, and we have to key into it. A good starting point, I would say, is the development of an industrial carbon management innovation framework, where we could consolidate the science of climate change and the requisite technology for adoption in an enabling environment. And we must build these enabling ecosystems in order for us to support innovative decarbonization and foster partnerships, like we said earlier, between private sectors and development organizations such as the CATF and the African Development Bank and the World Bank Group. We need these strategic partnerships in order for us to also build capacity, because we cannot run decarbonization in isolation. The government officials must be involved. The corporate executives have to be involved. The development financiers especially have to be involved, because they are the ones who most times provide the funding for these strategies or for these goals to be pushed, basically. And not leaving behind the technical consultants, those of them that have the technical know-how of how to achieve these innovations. We should also look at some private sectors that are taking the lead in this innovation, like I mentioned earlier, where we have the likes of Notori that utilize the carbons emitted. It's part of the design of the plant to utilize it. So I believe some other industries, some other bodies should also look into how to model people who are already taking the lead in this and explore the innovations that are available at our fingertips, because it's clear, the evidence is clear. We cannot deny that decarbonization offers diverse opportunities for us. So in order for us to maximize the value chain in multiple sectors, in the regions, in the countries, in our local governments, as industries, as different industrial sectors as well, we must see that these new technologies that are emerging from decarbonization, we have to key into it.